When you think of witch trials, you tend to think of Salem, but the Salem witch trials only lasted a little over a year and resulted in 20 deaths, 19 hangings, and a pressing. But before Salem, there was a 50-year stretch in Germany that resulted in the stake burning of thousands. Yep, that's right. From 1581 to 1631, that's 50 years, 4 major witch hunts occurred in the Germanic states, which at the time were part of the Holy Roman Empire. And keep in mind, by empire here we mean almost 1,800 individual kingdoms, city-states, and the such that each had their own individual ruler, but also fell under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor. And because of the Protestant Reformation and the resulting Catholic Counter-Reformation, most of them couldn't even agree in religious aspects. Everybody got that? Okay, good. Another thing that needs to be made clear here is that before the 1200s, the church and Christianity overall rejected the existence of witches and witchcraft. They saw it as nothing more than mumbo-jumbo left over from the pagans. And then this guy came along, Thomas Aquinas, whose writings were rather popular, and among them he argued that witchcraft wasn't simply deluded people, but rather works of demons on the behalf of humans or the results of Satan himself. And boy howdy did this snowball, so that by the time we get to 1581, there have been more than a few witch hunts already. But something else came along and really got the fires burning, and that thing was the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age being a cooler period that lasted from a few hundred years to about 500 years depending on who you ask. And one of the side effects of this cooling period was massive crop failures. And when crops kept failing and people were starving, they could either blame it on a complex environmental issue that they had no comprehension of, or witches. Yeah, they went with witches. And as far as those big 4 witch trials, originally rustled up by Johann von Schonenberg, who was made Archbishop of the Diocese of Trier in, you guessed it, 1581. These trials took until 1587 to reach the actual city of Trier, the area around the city burning an estimated 1,000 men, women, and children at the stake. Now keep in mind, sometimes they were beheaded first, unfortunately sometimes they weren't, but mostly they were because it wasn't about punishment, it was about destroying the body. Once the witch hunting bonanza reached the city, leaving the surrounding country rather less populated, supposedly several villages were left with only a single resident, another 368 are known to have been executed, maybe more, we're not quite sure. Another reason for this going on was the fact that a lot of people got rich off of it, from officials that profited from the seized property, to the executioner that supposedly rode around covered in gold and silver. Also, when you execute a farmer, exile his children, do God only knows what to his wife, and confiscate his lands, those lands aren't being farmed. So the already shrinking food supply would just shrink more, which led to more trials, and the cycle continued, until a priest named Cornelius Loos made a public speech and everybody kind of came to their senses. And this pretty much lasted until... Just like how the trials in Trier kicked off with a new head honcho, the trials in Fulda started after Balthasar von Dernbach regained power. He had previously been exiled, it's a whole thing. What matters is he put another Balthasar, this one Balthasar Neuss, in charge, and until von Dernbach's death in 1606, about 250 people were killed. After his death, Neuss was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually beheaded. And then we had the Wonder Twins of Germanic 30 Years' War witch trials. The 30 Years' War fought from 1618 to 1648, and one of the main factors behind the war was the fight between Catholics and Protestants. You know, the whole Reformation, Counter-Reformation thing. 8 million people died in the war, by the way, mostly from the Germanic states. And while the fighting between states and countries went on, witch hunts reared their ugly heads. There were smaller trials like in Mainz, and this helped egg on the creation of trials in Würzburg and Bamberg. Philip von Ehrenberg was responsible for overseeing the trials and roughly 900 executions in Würzburg. And something I might want to add here to make sure we're clear. Nobody was safe. In the capital city of Bonn, the chancellor and his wife were executed. We know that children as young as 3 and 4 were killed. Peasantry and nobles alike both felt the heat of the witch fires. These trials came to an end when Sweden took over. And then over in Bamberg, where they burned so many witches that they had to build a crematorium in order to be more efficient with their firewood usage. And if you're running out of firewood because you're burning too many witches, there's something wrong, something very, very wrong. The death toll there was roughly 1,000 people and was overseen by this feller, Johann von Dornheim, also known by the nickname Hexenbrenner, which, as some of you may have already realized, means witch burner. He went so far as to build a witch house, I'm doing air quotes here, where accused witches were imprisoned and tortured. The trials ended because of two factors. First, they arrested a woman whose husband fought for her release, all the way to the Empire's version of the Supreme Court, who sent several rulings back, all of which were ignored, and when they found out that a messenger was being sent with a mandate to free her, they sped things up and had her executed as quickly as possible. This turned the clergy and a good chunk of the people against the Hexenbrenner. And second, eventually the Swedish came a-knocking, and fearing what they would do to him after what he'd been up to, he fled and ended up dying years later in exile. So the next time you think of witch trials, don't think of Salem, think of Germany. It's not like the first thing you think of when you think of Germany isn't worse.